Society Matters.
Hello and welcome to HMTV. I'm your host of this brand new podcast, Raised by Survivors, here at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. I will be co-hosting this series with the chairman of the board, Alan Mindel. Alan, this should be fun and interesting.
I have to say I'm really excited to do it because, we rightfully focus a lot on our survivors, especially as it's a population that's dwindling.
Yes.
But there's a perspective growing up with these people that's a unique existence that I think people are going to come to understand.
It's a good point about the dwindling numbers. We do still have a few that are participating with our programs. They actually started to participate just in the last few years because there's some sense of urgency for them to get involved because there's only a few of them left and we need them to tell their stories.
For sure.
But we have stories, our own parents.
Absolutely, and it's funny how we learn them, and it's, funny kind of how it sticks with us and how it affects us as we go.
Now, you grew up on Long Island.
Yeah.
I've lived on Long Island most of my life, but the first, let's say, 14 years was in Brooklyn, New York, in a very tough Italian neighborhood. But you grew up, I think, in more of a Jewish neighborhood. Is that right?
I grew up in an area that was mostly Jewish, conservative Jewish, upper middle class, well-to-do, a bit of a melting pot, and I'm still there to this day, But for my parents, to be there was, a dream they couldn't have imagined. And they made sure I understood that.
Right.
I think they always knew a survivor wanted to make sure that they would do everything and anything for their kids. But they wanted to make sure that we understood, hey, what we're getting to do right now, this is not what you should be just, anticipating. Mm-hmm. There was work to be here, and we need to enjoy every second of it, but we're not entitled to it. We have to work for it, and we shouldn't simply expect it'll be like that.
And those were the values that they gave us because they appreciated every little thing. They appreciated living here in the States because the opportunities here for every person, every walk of life was pretty much the same for the most part.
I know that you and I have gotten to meet lots of different people over time, some really phenomenal folks that have done a lot for this country. I will say that I never met a man that was more patriotic and loved America more than my father. And I'll never forget, as a little kid, I was 9 years old when Carter was completing his term. And my father was no huge fan of Carter. Mm-hmm. And he had his issues, and he would, be very clear to make sure that as a 9-year-old, I understood each and every one of them. But, I asked him at one point, I said, Dad, if things are so tough here, why do we want to live in America? And like it was yesterday, I remember it, he turned around so angry and so upset and was tearing immediately and said, you don't understand, It's because we're in America that we can talk about what can be better. And make no mistake, there is no greater place on earth than where we are right now. No place do you have the freedoms that we have here. No place can someone like me with nothing can pull up by the Statue of Liberty and be here and talk to you like we are now.
Right.
No place else on the planet. Don't ever forget it.
I think my parents learned about life in America for Jewish people from their friends who wrote to them about what life was like. Now, I was born in Israel.
Right.
My twin brother and I were born in Jaffa, in a little hospital there. And for 6 years, we lived there, and I have fond memories. I go back a lot, but we have fond memories. And I wondered, why did my parents pick us up and bring us to Brooklyn, of all places? I was a very proud Israeli, even as a little kid.
Right.
I loved being an Israeli. And I never really knew, but I kind of figured it out later on in life because they were not transparent why they came here. And I realized later on that they wanted me and my brother to have better opportunities. But I think because of what they went through in the war, during the Holocaust, and living in Israel, surrounded by enemies and constant wars, they probably had enough. And they didn't want to raise two young boys in an environment that was similar to what they went through. And so I think that's why they came here. Even though they said, we just wanted you to have more opportunities, I think that it was more than that.
Yeah. Well, listen, America has been a phenomenal place for Jews, I would say right up until October 7th. You know, on October 8th, that calculus is changing a little bit. But we know that we've been a very productive part of this nation, and our love for it has been pure, and that we deserve to be here.
Absolutely.
And that we will fight for our right to be here and for our kids to be here freely like anyone else.
And because we're fighting that good fight, I think the tide will turn.
Yeah.
I feel hopeful because this is a great country.
Yeah.
And it will do the right thing.
For my dad,
Yeah.
The way he got to America, first of all, it wasn't always easy for everybody.
Right.
My dad, amongst other talents, if we get to talk about how he survived, but he was one heck of a chess player. His entire family was one heck of a bunch of chess players.
Really?
And he went, after the war, he would go and he found, a lieutenant that he would play chess with, an American lieutenant. And it wasn't easy to get the right to come to America. But he sat down, made friends with a guy, and he would play chess with him every day. The first time he played chess with him, my dad beat him in 3 moves, and that was the end of it. And he showed him how he beat him. He said, okay, tomorrow we'll have another lesson. And he had these lessons for over a year that he was teaching him how to play chess. And every time, he'd let the guy do a little better, and a little better, and a little better. And one day, after like a year, they were playing for hours, and my dad, at the very end, let the guy win. So it was the greatest experience the guy ever had in his life.
That's a great story. Tell me briefly about...
And at that moment, he asked the guy, he never asked him for anything, he said, what can I do to get papers to come to the United States of America? And he told him how much it would cost, and my dad said, I don't have that much.
Yeah.
So he said, how much you got? My dad sold every single thing he had so that he could come to this country.
Wow, that's a great story.
And when he got here, he heard about this incredible invention when you get off the boat called the Yellow Pages, which is something you and I know, and I bet there might be a couple people younger than our children that might have no clue what the Yellow Pages is. And he said, I'll have my address in it. Find my address and go from the phone book. You can walk to my house. And walked across the Brooklyn Bridge and, found his friend, slept on his couch, and got a job the next day.
So was it the Yellow Pages or the White Pages?
The White Pages.
The White Pages, right? Because the Yellow Pages...
The Yellow's for the marketing.
I mean, we're talking, it's already almost maybe 10 or 20 years since people would get the Yellow Pages and the White Pages delivered to their homes. But since we have just about 15 minutes left, I'm going to spend half of that time talking about my parents, and then you tell me about your parents' story.
Sure.
So my father lived on the eastern side of Poland, which is now the Ukraine. Wow. It was very close to the Russian border. And he lived in a little shtetl, 1,500 Jews. Now, whatever they heard about what was happening in Germany was all hearsay. So they didn't believe everything that was going on. Whereas my mother grew up on the western side of Poland, on the other side of Germany. Whatever they heard, they knew was pretty accurate. So it was a different response to when Hitler crossed the border. So for the first couple of years during World War II, my father's village was occupied by the Russians, right? And then Hitler, of course, breaks his a treaty with the Soviet Union, and it crosses into the other part of Poland, which was occupied by Russia. And the Russian soldiers told the elders of my father's village, "You better come with us because they're going to kill you." And the elders said, "What are you talking about? We've been here for hundreds of years. Where are we going to go? Where are we going to go?" So they decided to put together, you ready for this? A welcoming committee for the Nazis. They put a table out with food, liquor, jewelry, whatever they could, gather to appease the Nazis when they entered the village. So the Gestapo were the first to enter in their motorcycles. And they get off the motorcycles, take out their sidearms, and execute the welcoming committee and start arresting the rest of the Jews. My grandfather tells my dad, "You better go watch a cow" of a friend of mine, a Protestant who was an upstander. And the Protestant farmer told my dad to go to the forest. My father lived in a forest for 3 years from age 10 to 13. I don't know how he made it out alive. I don't think I can do it. It got down to minus 20 degrees. One night he was sleeping with a mother and baby. I have to tell this story because it's an incredible story. He's sleeping with a mother and baby in a ditch covered with branches and leaves. The Nazis hunted down Jews like animals at night because the German shepherds could sniff them out. During the day, Jews could run. But at night, they're sleeping. The German shepherds could sniff them out. And so the baby starts to cry. The baby that he was with the mother, starts to cry. I don't know why we put mothers in situations where they have to make a decision between a bad choice and a very bad choice. So the mother takes my father's hand, he's only 10 years old, and forces him to silence the child so that it wasn't her hand. My dad would wake up in the middle of the night, and I never knew why he would wake up screaming and crying. And so she made a child, Alan, she made a child.
A killer.
Silence a child. And he had to live with this guilt his entire life.
When did he tell you the story?
He never told me the story. My mother told me the story. You see,
That's
he couldn't mouth it.
Bear it.
No, he couldn't talk about it. It was just too much for him to talk about. My mother made sure that we knew these stories so that we knew what he went through.
Right.
And that was important to her. My mother on the other side, I have just a couple minutes and I'll tell you her story. She lived on the other side of
Take your time, by the way. We're going to blow through the minutes. Don't worry about it.
Okay,
Forget about that
She
clock.
lived on the western front of Poland. Hitler crosses the border.
Right.
Within days, they occupy my mother's village. But my grandmother was smart. As soon as that happened, she picks up her 4 kids and puts them on a train. My mother's 2 years old. Puts them on a train, headed to Russia. A lot safer there. Right? 1,400-mile journey, took a couple of weeks. But she gets off at one of the stops because the kids are crying. So she tells the older child to watch the 3 as she goes outside to find food. She comes back with food.
Train's gone.
The train is gone. It took my grandmother, Alan, you ready for this? 5 years to find all 4 kids.
Wow.
They were all separated in different parts. My mother ended up in a Christian orphanage in Russia.
But she was 2.
She was 2, but then her mother found her when she was 7.
How'd she figure it out?
I don't know. That's the story I got to find out. Right now I'm doing research about this guy, and I don't know what I can find out. But how did she survive? Where did she sleep? How did she eat? How did she find the kids? She must have tracked it down. But it took her 5 years to find my mother.
It wouldn't be relevant for your mother, but there's a story of how a lot of those kids were found, a little older.
Yeah.
They used to go to the Christian orphanages, and the rabbi would go, Shema Yisrael. Mm-hmm. And if the kids said Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, they go, that's one of ours.
I see. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's how they found them through.
But this is a story of resilience. I tell kids all the time that their parents would do the same for them.
Listen,
they would turn every rock to find them.
Every rock.
And that's one of the lessons of the Holocaust, is not to take anything for granted. Don't take your parents, your teachers, your friends for granted. My father, when he came out of this hell, he didn't take anything for granted. He loved his kids, he loved his family, he loved his friends.
There's a certain passion.
Yes.
When you live through the horrors of what happened to your family, you're going to have a different view of it. you know? And it affected everything, every meal, how you did in school, how you kept yourself together, every aspect of it. I mean, I have two parents with two very different stories. My father lived in Krakow, and not a Jewish part of Krakow. And he was one of those folks, you know, the hatred of him as a Jew did not start with the Holocaust. It started, you know, when he was a little kid. Him and his brother were the only Jews in their school. And they would get beaten almost every day. They would fight for their lives. And my dad used to carry a slingshot with him to school. He was a man that was just brought off tough as iron with it because it was a fight every day to survive. And it was him and his brother against the whole world. He didn't have a single other friend in the world. He happened to be this guy that was incredibly mechanically gifted. And that was the only thing that interested him in life, really. That and living, surviving. And so he used to hang out in the rafters of a printing press. And they tried to chase him out, but he was this little kid running around, 11 years old. They couldn't even bother with him. One day, the printing press breaks. And they call in a repair company, and he's watching them. And the guy goes, the press is going to be out of business for months. There's nothing we can do. We need to get a part that has to be custom made in Munich. And my dad yells down from the rafters, I can fix the press. He's a kid, you know what you're talking about. He goes, I can fix it. The owner says, kid, if you can fix this press, you can hang out here as much as you ever want. I'll never chase you again. And he came down from the rafters, and within minutes he fixed it.
Wow.
And he was that kind of guy. He could engineer things in his head. Yeah. His whole life he had that talent. So from then on, he had the ability, you know, to fix. And he could hang out in that press anytime. So the war is about to start with Germany, and his father was in the Polish army. They go off to war, and that was the last time he saw his father throughout the entirety of the war. He had no idea what had happened to him whatsoever. And, you know, the war between Poland and Germany wasn't much of a war. It lasted a day and a half, 2 days total. I mean, that was it. They called it Blitzkrieg for a reason. It was quick. And the next day, the Nazis were going to be in Krakow, you know. So in his school, the teacher said, you know, if we want to really welcome the Nazis here, we should give them a gift. We've got these 2 Jewish students, and we should beat them right for them. So my dad gets away. His brother doesn't. His brother gets beaten senseless. That night, my father, with his brother, who's not well, he goes to the printing press and he makes birth certificates, fake birth certificates for his family. But his number one goal was not the birth certificates, it was the teacher. So him and his brother plotted to make sure that when the teacher came out of the house and came over a tree, they poured hot tar on him.
Oh, my God.
And I'll never forget, I'm like 12 or 13 years old. And my father's telling me the story, and he didn't tell me stories easily. It was always an emotional crack to kind of tell it. And he said, Alan, and as he's saying it, he's grabbing the cup, and I see the veins tightening as he's holding on to a cup. And he said, my only regret in life, the tar wasn't hotter. I wish that tar was hotter. That was it. You know, he was the kind of guy that
was awful.
He needed nothing. You know, he could handle himself in any situation.
Yeah.
And most of the people when I was growing up knew that was the wrong one to mess with, no matter what. So he created his papers. He worked in a few different jobs throughout the war, and he would help people in the forest. You know,
what part of Poland was he in?
He was around Krakow, but from then he traveled all over. He went east. He went all over because he had papers. So he was a mechanic. He did plumbing. He could fix anything. So that gave him the ability for pretty easy employment.
That's something we have in common. My dad also, like myself, liked to fix things.
Yeah.
We can engineer anything. My dad
Yeah.
was able to. I learned a lot about success through him because if this didn't work, he worked around it. He went over it, under it, around it. He managed to come up with a solution, and he's very.
Let me ask you: when he had his shop, was everything in a perfect place at all times?
Oh my God! And not only that, he made me wash his tools like 100 times until they were brand spanking new.
Every time.
Yeah.
There was only one
He
way.
appreciated everything.
Only one way.
Yeah.
The right way. There's no such thing as another way.
And a lot of survivors became very successful here in the United States because of the opportunities, but they also were smart. They knew how to work their way around.
They had the fire.
And yes, they had the fire, and they gave great customer service if they were in the service industry.
Yeah.
They created products that were, fantastic, and
Yeah.
they made quite an impact. How about your mom?
My mom, she was in a small town called Sebenya, and her family ran the general store. And that was a shtetl, small town.
Was that like on the eastern part of Poland?
Much closer to the eastern side. And, but it wasn't Ukraine. It was Poland.
I see.
And, she had a huge family, religious family, and it was different for them. She never escaped anything. The Nazis came into her town, and the first night, her father, her oldest brothers were taken out, and, within hours, they were dead. They dug their own graves. That was it for them. And there was another family that they killed the father too, and a mother and daughter their house was taken by the Nazis for them to live in, and they were told that they could, be on the street. And my grandmother that I never met because she didn't survive, took them in, and so it was this woman named Ruti. And when I was growing up as a little kid, my mom has all these sisters and a brother that had survived, but she also introduced me to her sister Ruti. And until I turned like 15, and I was like going around the family circle of it, I didn't know that Ruti wasn't a biological sister to my mother because she was her sister, So, 10, 11 months in, my mom and Ruti are sent to a work camp in Sudetenland. I actually need to find out the camp one day of it, but she made bullets and she made cotton yarn. And, it was Ruti who told me, your mother is the most stubborn human the world has ever known. Because your mother was too stubborn to die and too stubborn to let me die. Because they would march in the snow, the death marches. And, freezing temperatures. And in snow with, wooden clocks, no shoes, no clothing for it. They were prisoners, slaves. And people would die along the way. And Ruti said that she got to a point, and Ruti told me the story about how, she fell in the snow and just fell there to die. And my mother said, you can't, you're not. And she said, leave me. And my mother was too stubborn to leave her, picked her up and carried her 16 miles till they got to the next camp.
What a story.
Too stubborn.
What a story.
And my mother was the same one who, she had a sister who got sent to the camp much later and ended up in the food concession. So that was a great job because you could, maybe steal a piece of bread. So she'd give it to my mother, but my mother wouldn't take it for herself. She would share it with the bunk. And if she got an extra piece, she'd bring it to the typhoid bunk because they wouldn't feed the typhoid because they figured they'd all die.
Right.
Ruti told my mom, don't go in the typhoid room, you'll get typhoid. It's the most stubborn woman alive. She goes, they're not going to die on my watch. And she got typhoid at the end. When the camp was liberated, everyone left, but my mom had to recover for months. That's how they got separated.
God, she survived. And she went through.
Too stubborn to die.
That's the point. Like you said from the beginning, she was very stubborn. My mom was very stubborn too. I think a lot of young women.
If you did not have that incredible will and fire, you were not going to make it. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of luck involved. There's a lot of strong people that didn't make it. My dad's brother that had made it at the end, he was killed right before liberation. He was just found out and discovered, and that was that. Nothing could have been done. But,
thanks for sharing that, Alan. We both had front row seats to survivors with PTSD, that's for sure. And what people think is, survivor, kids think was normal really was not. We're going to talk about some of those things.
Let's talk about what when you grow up with people who didn't have a childhood.
Right.
And what that meant for them raising their kids.
Right. And what we thought was normal. We're going to talk about that today. It
was normal for us too, and no one else.
Exactly. So stay tuned for our next episode here at HMTV, Raised by Survivors. I'm your co-host, Bernie Furshpan and Alan Mindel.